Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Moore-Ede, and I'm about to have a very productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy. Now, for most of us, light is just, well, it's there. We flip a switch, we stare at screens, and spend our days under artificial bulbs without giving it a second thought. But what if the kind of light we're exposed to is quietly shaping our sleep, energy, and even our long-term health? Dr. Martin Moore-Ede knows the answer better than almost anyone. A world-leading expert on circadian clocks, he was part of the Harvard Medical School team that located the human circadian clock itself, essentially discovering where our internal timekeeping system lives. His research uncovered the key blue wavelengths of light that regulate our sleep cycles, and he spent decades working to create healthier lighting solutions. In this episode, we dive into the unseen effects of artificial light, why night owls, like me, struggle with more modern lighting, how LEDs could be the DDT of our time, and what we can do to reclaim our natural rhythms. So if you've ever felt wired at night, sluggish in the morning, or just off without knowing why, this conversation is about to shed some serious light on the issue. Let's get into it. Martin, thank you so much for being on the show today. I wouldn't say Dr. Martin because that's Doc Martin, and then we're thinking about shoes and so on and so forth. So I'm really pleased to have you on the program today to talk about the book, which I'm holding in my hands right here, The Light Doctor, Using Light to Boost Health, Improve Sleep, and Live Longer. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Delighted to join you, Mike.
So I've had the opportunity to interview Dr. Michael Bruce, who wrote The Power of When, and we're talking about circadian rhythms and so on and so forth. And I'm a night owl myself. So when this book came across my desk and I started to go through, I'm like, this is fascinating to me, especially considering as we're recording this interview, we're about to shift daylight savings time. Like we're literally at the point, at least in our part of the world, because you're based on the East Coast, I'm based on the West Coast of Canada. And I really want to, one of the things that you kind of highlight in the book is this idea that light is really as crucial, as important as food and water and air for our health. Why do you think that they all don't fit on the same level in terms of importance? Like, why do people underappreciate light?
I think people take light for granted. There's daylight outside and darkness outside at the appropriate times of day. And inside, we just flick the light switch and don't think anything about it. We never think about what is the health impact of the light. And one of the reasons, quite frankly, is you cannot tell what's in that light as it comes to you. In other words, people see a light, for example, as being white or yellowish white, and they think that's the color. In fact, that's an optical illusion.
Right.
Light is actually made of a broad range of visible and invisible colors, wavelengths, and each one of them has a very distinct effect on our health. And the mixture is very important. And so they don't realize, and they can't just tell by looking whether a light is healthy or, quite frankly, unhealthy.
I'm going to jump right into what I need to hear as a night owl. So we live in a world where night owls kind of are also not at the same level as those early risers, right? Everything is geared towards the early riser, and there's always this push to, get up early, the early bird gets the worm, all of this stuff. You're kind of fighting your body clock a bit. What are some of the biggest mistakes night owls make? First off, is it healthy for us to be pushing ourselves into those early hours? And secondly, if it's not, or even if we decide that we're not going to, what are some of the mistakes that night owls like me would make?
Well, I think one of the most interesting studies that actually points out the differences was one done by Dr. Wright, Kenneth Wright, out at the University of Colorado Boulder, who took a group of perfectly normal people, and he documented their lifestyles beforehand. So some were night owls like you, some were morning types. I happen to be a morning type. I get up at 5 o'clock every morning. I'm a bit of a social zombie after about 9 o'clock at night. Took people like us out there, a mixture of people, different ages, and took them into the wilderness without any electronics, any electric lights, no phones, nothing. They could build campfires, and they spent a week or more there. And what was fascinating was that when they're outside there, sleeping obviously in the pitch darkness of the wilderness, night in the wilderness in the Colorado Rockies, um, their sleep patterns actually started to become the same as each other. In other words, and so one of the questions is, and they slept longer, felt better, all the things about being exposed, the benefits we can talk about of natural daylight during the day and plenty of it, and pitch dark at night. But what's really fascinating was this merging together of the patterns. So everyone was pretty close to the same pattern. And what we deduce from that is the night owl can't quite help it because they're actually more sensitive to light, and particularly to the blue part of the light spectrum. And that's the blue light that resets the circadian clock in the brain. We know the pathways and how it works. It suppresses melatonin and disrupts sleep. But in fact, the night owls get nudged by evening light to later and later hours. And so when you take away evening light or artificial light, people move back towards a pretty much tighter range.
Right.
Which tells you something about what the differences are.
Well, and I want to dive into those dimensions of light. Like one of the chapter 10, becoming a smart consumer of light, is definitely where we're going to head for sure. It reminds me of this experiment, and I'm going to butcher the French scientist's name, that went into the caves back in the 60s and then in the 70s, and he went down into the caves to kind of understand how humans experience time and space, but he went underground. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, I would imagine, and how his circuit, like the passage of time changed, where it became 24 hours was really 48 hours to him. So light plays a real big role in how we perceive time as well, right?
Well, that's right. In fact, it is that natural light-dark cycle that keeps us synced to the 24-hour day. And yes, Michel Siffre, I believe his name was the guy who was the caveman, as it were, or there's a fancy name for it. I'm trying to think, a speleologist, I think, something like that, who spent, weeks and weeks down there in caves. But in fact, that's been replicated by creating apartments which have no clocks, no windows, where there's no regulation of the light and dark, or at least artificial regulation of it. And in that case, people then start to drift, and your natural circadian clock tends to drift a bit longer than 24 hours. So, what happens is that people after a week or two or three or four have walked all the way around the clock, and actually have lost a day in the process, or a day, it depends how many times you go around. And I find it very hard to believe that, it's not March the 27th. It's actually only, it's actually March the 31st. In other words, that they count fewer days just because they go around the clock. So that's because this light and dark is what's keeping us in sync. It's not a passive response to light and dark. It's clocks. It's driven by internal clocks, and they are robust, and they keep on going whether they're time cues or not, but they need the light just to keep them synced to the regular day-night world. And we screw with that every time we turn on electric lights, artificial lights in appropriate times.
Well, I mean, and it's also engineered that way, like places like Las Vegas, right? Very little light, no clocks, air being pumped in, it could pass. And it's to serve the mission of what's going on inside of those casinos, as opposed to serve, like, say, the human experience, right?
Yeah, and that's another whole thing about the light at night, particularly the blue-rich LED lights. That's what we ubiquitous now in the store shelves. Actually render you in a state of stress, or they amp you up. In other words, there's systems in the body, automatic systems called the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the fight or flight response. They activate that and make you hyper, right? As opposed to, for example, if you take away the blue light but put in infrared light instead, the infrared, which is the invisible part of the red spectrum, that actually activates the parasympathetic response that actually calms you down. And so, if you're going to be at your best, and of course, when you amp people up with a constant level of stress, That is just not good for your health, and also not much good for your sanity either.
I want to shift into this idea of being a smart consumer of light, because in chapter 10, one of the areas that I immediately got my attention based on the kind of subject I talk about are the four dimensions of lighting. So, and this chapter is deep and rich, and there's great diagrams for those that have picked up the book or are going to pick up the book. There's really an interesting, it's I like the way that you've illustrated this stuff. I mean, if those who see the video, there's interesting ways to kind of say, hey, this is what this looks like, as opposed to necessarily completely reading about it. But you talked about the different types of those dimensions of lighting. Can we get into that a little bit?
Sure. The various aspects of lighting, and most people are buying light looking at two parameters. One is, how much brightness does it produce? In other words, the aesthetics, and what does it look like? And most light is sold, this is a nice looking light. The room looks really nice with this light. And the other side then has been more recently concerned about energy consumption. Then how energy efficient is it to provide light? How can we reduce the utility bill, for example? But the two big things that are missed are the other two dimensions. One is this health aspect in terms of how healthy it is. Is it going to create a greater risk of diabetes, cancer, heart disease or not, depending on the mixture, the spectral mixture, or the composition of the different color wavelengths? And the other one is that light going to serve my purpose in terms of the mood I want to be in, or is it going to boost my performance? In other words, if you're doing your tax returns in the evening, you want a light that actually, one of the goals as you do that tax return is to not fall asleep while you're doing them, and not punch in the wrong digits. So those are the sort of things where you think about that alerting feature of light. So basically, you've got to balance all of those, and that's really the solution. It's what you need when, and the whole secret is finding the right light at the right time, but not just buying lights based on, how the industry largely sells them, which is this aesthetic, it looks pretty, or is, cheap,
Or
produce cheap brightness.
or will last a long time. I think that's part of it too.
Which is itself, one of the arguments of LEDs. There's a lot of fiction in that, quite frankly. They never last as long as advertised, most of these LEDs, but they last a lot longer than an incandescent light bulb.
LED lights and screens are kind of like DDT and asbestos of our time. You kind of get into that. That's pretty bold. You've kind of touched on that a little bit, but let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because I think it's become the prevalent source of light that we purchase for our bulbs, for, again, the screens, all that stuff. And there's blue. It's interesting. The glasses I'm wearing right now, they don't have the reflective coating, the blue, all of that stuff, because when I'm on camera, it reflects. It actually reflects back on the camera. So I have a set that I would wear that doesn't reflect back on that when I'm not on camera. So there's different dynamics, the way that my glasses interact with them, and you wear spectacles as well. So, let's dive into that a little bit, because I don't think, like you said, there's a lot of stuff that's not shared out there.
Well, the wavelength is absolutely critical in light. And so we've talked this, we'll just go through that briefly. We've got ultraviolet light, which is the invisible light that is short wavelength. It's the light that people worry about with skin cancers, for example. And that's why a lot of it is blocked, really quite unnecessarily, and sometimes too much is blocked. It is also involved in vitamin D. But as you go up the spectrum of violet, you find the deep violet light is actually entering your eyes, prevents myopia. But we block that out now with our windows. We block that out. Our glasses, my glasses, I'm sure your glasses, remove the deep violet. So we only are seeing a narrow part of the spectrum. What's coming in through the windows is narrowed because our window glass is treated, our eyewear is treated. And then when we want to control the blue that's disrupting our circadian clocks, that's around 480 blue. It's a sky blue color. That is actually distinct from the violet and the royal blue colors. It's a fairly narrow band. I'm going to tell you that if your glasses look as though they're reflecting a little bit of blue, but they're not orange and yellow, I'm going to tell you that they're not doing you much good in the evening.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
What you buy for the and get paid another $200 on a prescription pair of glasses, and with special treatments, that actually provides this little bit blue tint, right? But it actually is blocking entirely the wrong blue. It's not blocking the sky blue color, which is the one that is detected by the eyes, the receptors in the eyes and photopigments in the eyes that detect this sky blue color, that in turn pass a signal through to the circadian clock, which in turn either robustly improves your daytime function, or if at night, it disrupts it, and it disrupts all your circadian rhythms. So basically, yeah, there are some tips there. So we can get into what the problems are. So why do you want to block blue light at night? That's really, I think, we ought to focus on.
Yeah.
A huge number of illnesses now are linked to the disruption of the circadian clocks, and there are millions of clocks in the body. Every cell of the body has clocks. There is also a master clock called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a master pacemaker. This is all disrupted when it sees blue light because it detects it as though it's daytime, and so it sends the wrong signal. Part of the mechanisms of cortisol and melatonin is a hormone that people have called the sleep hormone quite incorrectly. It's actually the darkness hormone. It signals to the body that it's dark outside. And along with a whole bunch of other systems, that's when the body goes into repair and restoration mode. So now, and what happens to restoration is pretty important. The oxidants, gets rid of toxic effects. It cleans up tumors that may be developing, cells may be dividing incorrectly that could become cancers. It suppresses them. All these processes are going on naturally at night. But if you introduce blue light from the LED light bulbs, which are rich in blue, unfortunately, that's how they get to produce cheap, bright light. Those LED light bulbs are actually causing your glucose metabolism, your insulin resistance. So you're getting a pre-diabetic state. I can render you diabetic in a few hours with just using a regular LED lights in the evening. They increase heart disease, breast cancer, huge issues to do with breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer. By the way, those are all cancers in young people that are climbing rapidly ever since the introduction of LED lights. And we know that women who have never seen electric light rarely get breast cancer. It was a very rare disease before electric light came along. It's now climbing rapidly, but blind women don't tend to get breast cancer. Women in Africa where they haven't got electricity yet don't get breast cancer, or it's much rarer. So those are some of the things that we can do, and we can go through a whole host of disease. I think the most significant thing, though, Mike, is these big studies that have looked at tens of thousands of people, in one case looking at 88,000 people, and they measured, they put light meters on them, so they actually knew exactly how much light did they get during the day and how much light did they get at night. In other words, were they sleeping in the dark, or were they sleeping with the lights on, or were they getting outdoors during the day where it's easy to detect because that's 1,000 times brighter than indoors. And when you looked at people who had the most light exposure, in other words, they went outside, they lived years longer than people who spent most of the time indoors. And most of us, the average person spends, only 8% of their time outdoors, a remarkably small amount in this modern world, because we're all sitting and looking at our screens, and we're doing what you and I are doing right now, right? And we tend to do a lot of that.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. So now other studies have found that cardiovascular disease is much less. These people are living longer. Recently I was looking at a study, and I said, well, I started thinking about, well, who would spend the most time outdoors? So an obvious one is golfers, because if you're going to play golf, you're going to play a round of golf, you're going to be out there 2-3 hours at least, outdoors. And if you're a golfer with a handicap score and are really playing a lot of golf, you're going to be getting a lot of outdoor light. And there's a big Swedish study of 300,000 golfers showing that they had a 40% lower rate of death rate. And these are people aged between 40 and 79. They died at 40% lesser rate. And that amounted to 5 years more lifespan per year. In other words, golfers live 5 years longer. So that's just one example. But there are other studies. It's not just golfing. It is any occupation or any person who's spending time outdoors and sleeping in the dark at night. That's the key combination. It's just going to plainly live years longer. So that's in summary, and it's all-cause mortality. It's, in other words, it's cardiovascular disease, it's heart disease, diabetes, all those different things, cancers and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fascinating area. And, one of the people, why we tend to, the advice that people have been given is stay indoors, don't get too much sunlight. It's going to cause skin cancers and melanoma. Well, actually, yes, going outdoors causes more skin cancers, but yes, you actually live years longer.
Yeah, it's nuanced. That's the thing, is that people want absolutes when there's no such thing as absolutes.
And this is fear of UV. And, as a result, we block the UV out of, and the reason why myopia, it's incredibly common. Kids are getting short-sighted at alarming rates. It used to be maybe 20% of kids, or less. It's now in the 50, climbing to 70 in some countries where they're spending most of their time indoors, and they're not exposed to light, natural light, which has this deep violet color, which is actually blocked by our glasses and blocked by windows, and certainly is not provided by artificial LED lights.
As you were talking about this, I couldn't help but think of what our sleep patterns were like before artificial light. And, obviously there's the door knockers that used to have to go around and knock on doors to wake people up. And they would have second sleep, right? They'd go to bed when the sun went down. They wouldn't sleep for the full eight. That's another thing that goes around. It's like everyone's got to have 8 hours of continuous sleep, but that's not what happened in the past either. Like there's so many different things. And so I want to know, as a night owl specifically, but I mean, this could apply to anybody, as we try to shut down our day to make sure that we are getting the right kind of light, whether it's minimal or otherwise, as we wrap up our day to get ready for sleep, which is when that restoration process can happen. What are some of the things that we can do?
Well, first of all, you need to really adopt, we all hear about nutritional diets, and there's so many books. When I was publishing my book, I was looking at what's out there. What are the publishers, big publishing houses producing? Look at Penguin Random House, and they had 1,800 books on their list to do with nutrition and diet and health. And I said, that's crazy. And one book on light and health, which was published before LEDs were invented. So it really radically, we haven't been, so you don't have but let's take a page out of that book.
Sure.
You need a light diet, right? We call it a light diet. And your light diet should be in the mornings, and there's a reason for it. In the mornings, especially, try to get outdoors. Spend a half an hour more better outdoors, because that's the time of day which is most effective at resetting your circadian clock, keeping your circadian rhythms in sync. And I don't mean you have to get out at dawn. Some people think they have to get out at dawn to do it. No, it's any time in reasonable mid-morning will work also.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, some of the spectrum, which is not found in LEDs in the far red part of the spectrum, actually will improve eyesight in elderly people. It's another thing we're finding. There's another color that does a very specific thing. But getting outside is healthy for you, and in the morning. And people, by the way, if you can't get outside, if you've got windows that point south and east. I happen to, just recently moved. I made sure our main windows are facing south and east, and my balcony is facing south and east. I get the morning sun. We know that patients in hospitals looking in rooms that are facing south and east get out of hospital, psychiatric patients, in half the time as the patients who are in rooms facing north and west. So we know it's the time of day also matters. So that's the morning thing. That's the first thing. Secondly, during the day, it's useful to try to stay close to windows if you can, enhance the blue if you can in content during the daytime. Certainly people who have offices near windows sleep longer than people who are in cubicles deep within a building under natural artificial light. Then the key next thing is once it is after sunset, you want to avoid blue, the sky blue light, the circadian blue light, like the plague, and hence you want to use blue-free lighting that can still provide you illumination, but contains none of that blue that's signaling the time of day. And lastly, as you wind down towards bedtime, you can make sure you're dimming the lights and then switching lights out entirely. Don't have alarm clocks with blue or white dials on them, like so many hotels give us. Use red, because red doesn't disturb. Use red or orange lights to light the way to the bathroom, and if you need to, make sure you don't trip over anything.
Sure.
So it's really a question of just managing that whole light diet, that light environment during the 24-hour day.
What about dimmers? I was thinking about this because I used it in a metaphor with relation to precision and kind of the on-off switch being, in terms of ones and zeros in coding, right? Like it's either on or off. But on a light switch, if you've got a dimmer, there's obviously a way that you can adjust it. And the old dimmers were like dials, right? And now they've got sliders, but there's also obviously apps and things like that. Like the light behind me, which I made sure I didn't have on when we started this conversation, has the ability to change. It's got a variety of lights and such. What about dimmers? Like, what role do they play? Is there anything that people need to think about when it comes to the dimming of lights, or is it more to do again with the different types of lighting that we have?
Well, it's a combination, right?
Okay.
In other words, it's a multiplier. So basically, the overall dimness or brightness of a light is going to determine how much light energy is there, how much irradiance is coming in. Then the next thing is, what's that irradiance made up of? How much blue, proportionally blue, does it have? We like lights in the evening that are less than 2% blue. Well, obviously, you could use a light that was less than 4% blue, for example, and dim it down and get the same effect.
Gotcha.
Dim it by half. So it is a dosage thing, absolutely. The one thing I will say about dimmers is make sure this whole thing is fully automatic. The last thing you want to be doing is figuring out when's the time to turn it up or down. And we're terrible at that sort of thing. And we tend to get lazy and forget and leave it set in one position. And it's just like your breathing.
Right.
If I start talking about your breath rate, you'll start breathing irregularly. If you're not thinking about it, automatically will just, normally run its course. You won't think about it. So you need to be an automatic system that is tuned to your local latitude, longitude. So it knows the season of the year, it knows the time of day, and then it just will match the sun. So as the sun goes down over the horizon, your lights should shift to one mode or another. So, but dimming is part of it. Sometimes we can't dim because we've got a task to do. Then it's very important to have a light that's very low in blue content, a zero blue light, if you like.
So when we talk about smart bulbs and things like that, obviously the smart aspect will allow those. I mean, you hook it up to an app or a smart home stuff, but my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of the smart bulbs out there are LED, right?
Yes, there's a lot of, the industry has got a superficial approach to this, largely, unfortunately. They play with something called coordinated color temperature, or CCT, and that's something you can find on most lights. And as you go for, if you go down to a coordinated color temperature CCT of 2700, for example, or 3000, the light becomes more yellowish. If you go up to 5,000 or 6,000, it becomes harsh and white and almost bluish. And yes, there's more blue in a high CCT lamp as in a low, but the difference is not that marked. So basically, the color of a light is a very poor substitute. So the industry got the idea that lights should be changing, um, and they fairly easy for them then just change the LED chips. What they failed to do is build LED chips. They now are many companies doing it. Build LED chips that actually are engineered to provide the right content, the right mixture of the colors. And you'd like to have a pretty full spectrum light during the daytime, for example, that colors, and you want to make sure it's really free of blue during the evening hours.
So that dovetails nicely into my last question before we wrap up. So, you're talking about where they're heading right now, the future of lighting. Where do you think it's heading? Like, are we on kind of the brink of a circadian revolution, so to speak? Or is this going to take a long time, like decades, to kind of really take hold?
Well, I got into really tackling this problem and actually starting to build and design and work with LED manufacturers to build the chips to do this about 10 years ago. And so those problems have actually been solved. And now there are companies now coming out with lights that are both have the right spectrum for day and night, light bulbs, light fixtures, and so forth. I have a website called circadianlight.org where you can find more information about what these light bulbs are. But essentially, yes, it is all just about to break. It's still a small fraction of lighting. Still, if you walk into a major retailer store, big box store, you'll find row after row, and they're all basically the standard LEDs, blue pump LEDs. But now, certainly on the internet and other sources, you're starting to see other lights come in that are especially designed for health benefits. And that's one of the things I do is I've got a website talking about them. I've also got a Substack column. That's the newsletter is published. It's got a readership of 25 million overall. Not my Substack, but a lot of people are reading Substack. And I do a column every 2 weeks that's really bringing up to date with what the latest findings are and the latest products are in this area. I think it's going to break. All lights should really be circadian. And it is a bit of a travesty. It's partly driven by government regulation. I've got a petition out there to reverse some of the regulations that are forcing unhealthy light. They do it by lumens per watt is the measure. That's how they measure so-called energy efficiency. But lumens only measures the yellow and green wavelengths, and not the healthy wavelengths, the reds and the blues, for example. So that's something where we've got to change the regulations so we're not forced in this very narrow box where only these blue-rich LEDs will be available. We've lost the incandescents, we've lost the fluorescents. We're soon going to, and the halogens. We're soon going to lose healthy light bulbs if we don't do something about it. So that's one of my big activities at the moment, a campaign for healthy lighting. And we've got thousands of people signing up for that.
Well, you've shone a spotlight, no pun intended, on a lot of things that I know I needed to hear, and my readers and listeners, of course, need to hear. I'm definitely going to go for a quick walk after this because it's still the morning, and I'm going to be evaluating all of my lighting in my study here. The book is called The Light Doctor, Using Light to Boost Health, Improve Sleep, and Live Longer. Dr. Moore-Ede, where can people pick up this book? And you mentioned your Substack. We'll link to that in the show notes, and also keep up with the rest of the work that you're doing.
Well, the book is a bestseller on Amazon, so it's easy to find, The Light Doctor at Amazon. It's also available in bookstores. It can be bought through bookstores as well. And if you have any trouble finding it, you can go to my website, thelightdoctor.com. That can lead you to the link to the book. But essentially, yes, it's a book designed for, as you say, for the lay person. You don't have to be a scientific expert. And I put in all the diagrams, as you kindly mentioned, because I know that some people really like to see things diagrammatically in pictures. Other people like to have words. And I want to meet both of those types of people and have it really available because it's a fascinating subject and a very visual one. So that's why the book is a lot of color diagrams and pictures in it.
Thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
I'm very delighted, and I hope your listeners will have productive lives as a result.
Thanks to Dr. Moore-Ede for taking the time to join me on the podcast today. You can check out all of the show notes for this episode wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. And if you're not already a subscriber, now's a great time to do it. Just click on the subscribe button or follow button if you're using Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, even YouTube. That way you don't miss a single episode of what's to come. You can easily search through the archives and you support the show in the process. That's it for this episode of A Productive Conversation. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Until then, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.